Good morning, everyone. We're celebrating the goodness of God. Me and my good friend Maggie, as she has been literally stirring up the neighborhood this morning. I woke up with this thought in my heart this morning. When you find yourself in a storm, let God be your confidence. Your confidence is what you are relying on, depending on, looking to in the time of adversity. It says in Proverbs chapter 3, looking at verse 25 and 26, it says, "Do not be afraid when you are in terror or in a crisis, nor from the trouble that comes from the wicked." The word terror, the word trouble, is indicative of the storms that we face in life. And we all face them. Crisis in the marriage, broken relationships, financial adversity, a negative medical report, storms from within, the rage, the anger, the shame, the anxiety, all of these things, bitterness. We all face these things. But the Bible says in verse 26, let God be your confidence. In other words, in those times of crisis and trouble and pain and chaos, don't look to your own ability. Don't find strength in your own power. Look to God's strength. Look to God's power. Let Him be your confidence. It says He will keep your foot from being taken. He's a rescuer. He's a deliverer. He's a healer. He's the peace that you need. He's the support and help that we need in our life and our story. But see, we have to first not be afraid, and we must allow Him to become our confidence. He must be the one that we're leaning on, depending on, relying on, trusting in times of adversity, in times of turmoil and pain. It goes on to say in Psalm 61, verse 2, "From the ends of the earth I will cry out to you when my heart is overwhelmed." He said, "Lead me to the rock that is higher than I." Man, I love that. Lead me to the power. Lead me to a strength. Lead me to something stable that's more stable than I am, more secure than I am. And then he goes on to say, he says, "You, God, have been a shelter for me. You have been a strong tower from my enemies." In other words, God, you are my confidence. You are what I'm leaning on. You are what I'm relying on. You are who I'm trusting in. You are who I'm looking to. Then it says in Psalm 62, looking at verse 5, it says, "My soul, wait thou only upon God, for 'cause from Him comes my expectation." In other words, I'm going to look at this situation based on what God can do, not what I'm doing. I'm going to look at it through God's strength and not my own strength. I'm going to rely on God's wisdom and not my own wisdom. From God comes my expectation. He gives me a foreshadow of things to come based on His efforts and not my own. Man, I love this. I love this word today. Then he goes on to say, He alone is my salvation and my strength. And He alone is my salvation and my rock. He is my defense. I shall not be moved. Man, I love those words. In other words, God, because you are my confidence, being that you are my rock, my place of stability, you are my salvation, my healing, my deliverance, you are my defense. I'm not going to be moved because you are my confidence. My confidence in you is what causes me not to be moved by the circumstance. In other words, I'm moved more by God and who I believe in, who I'm relying on, who I'm trusting in, more than the storm, more than the crisis, more than the pain, more than the adversity. In other words, I'm not going to be moved. That is so powerful. May you find strength in in God today, allow him to become your confidence. This reminds me of a story of Jesus in Mark chapter 4, when he was with his disciples, literally in the midst of a storm. And the Bible says that he was sleeping down in the bow of the ship, sleeping on a pillow. In other words, he was at a place of rest. And his disciples, who was also in the storm on the boat with him, the Bible says the storm was so horrific, the winds were so strong, and the waves were so mighty that water began to fill the boat. The boat began to take on water because of the water itself capsizing over the edge of the ship. And so them being overwhelmed, them being in terror, them being overtaken within, they came to Jesus, who was sleeping in the bow of the ship. And they said to him, "Do you not care that we're going to perish, that we're going to be destroyed, that we're not going to overcome this storm that we're in?" In other words, they were upset with him because he was not fighting the storm like they were. He was not relying on his own strength like they were. He was not worried, stressed, overtaken by it. This is what happens when you become your own confidence. You begin to rely on your own ability, your own power, your own strength. And sometimes in the storms of life, none of that will be enough. And in this story, it was not enough. They knew that it was over for them. They knew that they weren't going to make it. And all of this was based on their own confidence. See, they didn't realize that Jesus was their confidence. The minute Jesus arose, their confidence arose. You can never discover God as your confidence when you're still relying and leaning on your own. The Bible says that Jesus went out on the deck of the ship and he spoke to the wind, "Peace, be still," like the wind is blowing right now. And the Bible says that there was a great calm. In that moment, they realized that they had their confidence on the Lord, and that their confidence was not found in them, and that their confidence was found in him. In that moment, they realized that he was their confidence. He was their defense. He was the strong tower. He was the shelter in the midst of the storm. Is he your strength this morning? Is he your shelter this morning? Is he your salvation this morning? How did he become that? Begin to rely on him. Depend on him. Look to him and let him work. Let him move in your situations of life. May this word find you encouraged today. Remember, every day we need the Lord. So make sure every day you're spending time with him, because his grace is sufficient for you. Make sure you like, follow, subscribe to the channel. God bless you. We love you. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.